Good evening, education students. My name is Dr. Judy Jaunzems-Fernuk, and I'm super excited to be here with you whenever it is that you happen to watch this video. I look forward to sharing with you a little bit of my own story and my own experience and some things around positive behavior or classroom management strategies from something I call the human curriculum or a human curriculum. So you will notice that this curriculum starts with you and how you look at and manage and cope with your own emotions so that you can be strong classroom management leaders as well as human beings that model and share with your students how to manage different behaviors and emotions. And we know that many of our behaviors and emotions come from stress. So I will talk a little bit about stress. It's always an important topic to cover when we're thinking about heading into a new career and being at the start of our career, especially as caregivers, going into environments where we're taking care of many other people, and especially at this time during COVID-19 when there are a lot of unpredictable, I guess, events and scenarios that are happening in the world of teaching. So welcome. We'll spend about an hour together this evening or whenever you happen to watch this video. And then I really look forward to meeting live shortly for another hour or so of Q&A and conversation around this very important topic. So I'm going to suggest that you pause the video at different points and do some reflection and some thinking, and I invite you to do that. And when you do pause the video and think about yourself and your own experiences and connections to the topics, I hope that you jot down questions you might have and you bring those to our session together on the Wednesday evening in November so that we can have a really good, lively discussion. So I'll start out by telling you a little bit about myself, and I'm going to jump right into the beginning of my career. So those of you who know me will be familiar with the story I'm going to tell, but it's always a great way for me to start off any conversation about teaching. But I have been an educator for the better part of the last 20 years. So I started actually in pre-K prior to attending the University of Saskatchewan and attaining my B.Ed. And upon graduating with my B.Ed, I taught mostly in middle years. So grades 6 to 8 for about 12 years. I spent that part of my career, which was the majority of my career in K to 12 at King George Community School. So anybody who's familiar with that school, it was my home for many, many years. And I very much loved all of the teaching experiences I acquired at King George Community School. Many of the people there are still family to me, and students and families and staff and colleagues as well. Upon leaving King George, I moved to high school and I taught out of Nutana Collegiate for the latter half of my career, the latter 7 or 8 years in K to 12 anyway. And I taught in a program through Nutana for youth who experienced moderate to severe mental health concerns. So my role in the YRC program, and that's what it was called, the Youth Resource Center. So we were actually located downtown, and we were a hybrid program that was bridging healthcare with education. So actually, even though Nutana Collegiate was my home, I serviced or supported students from 3 different school divisions in Saskatchewan. So I worked as an educator and partially as a therapeutic counselor out of that program, as I also during that time acquired my master in therapeutic counseling and became a registered therapeutic counselor at that time as well. So since then, I've been out of K to 12 for a couple of years now and teaching here at the university. I teach in both curriculum studies and educational psychology. So some of you might be familiar with my courses in either discipline. My PhD was completed here at the University of Saskatchewan, and it was cross-departmental. And that's where this notion of the human curriculum was born, because I'm very interested in people, the brain, the mind, mental health, how we support one another to be well, but how that can be infused into what we do in the classroom, because I spent many, many years as a teacher, but also considering my students' mental health as I supported behavior and classroom management and all of the activities that were part of the day-to-day in the classroom. So in addition to my career over the last 20 years or so working with mostly children and youth, I am also a mom. So I have 3 boys. My oldest is 24 years old and he's just graduated from the U of A. So he's off in Alberta still currently living, and he has a performing arts degree. So he is an actor and enjoying his time out there despite having his life slow down quite a bit since COVID-19 came our way. And then my 2 younger boys are here at home with us in Saskatoon. So my youngest is in grade 7, actually at a school where I started my career. I taught for 1 year at Brunskill School, close to the university there. So I did spend a little bit of time there before heading over to King George for the remainder of my career. So my youngest goes to school there, my oldest went to school there, and our middle boy happens to go to a Catholic high school. So I have kids in a couple of divisions and kind of all over the place, and he's in his grade 12 year. So he's wrapping up his grade 12 year and looking forward to the end of the school year and graduating despite COVID-19 making changes to his life as well. So that's just a little bit about me and who I am, who is bringing you this workshop this evening, this conversation around classroom management. We're going to cover a few things. As I said, I'm going to start at the beginning of my career. I'm going to take you through some of the strategies and things that I learned over time. I'm not going to put a lot of resources into this presentation, but I will bring resources to the live. And if you're interested in looking up some of the educational or psychological gurus that I rooted my early work in, you're more than welcome to ask questions about that, and I'll provide some links to resources for that information. You know, as they say, I stand on the shoulders of many giants in education and psychology, and I've just taken this information and brought it to my classroom in the best way that I could over the years, given the challenges that I faced as a young teacher. I'll welcome you to bring those questions when we meet live. And other than that, I'm going to review, like I said, the beginning, middle, and end of my career in K-12 and talk a lot about you as a pre-service teacher and what you can do for yourself to support your own wellness and strength, because that's number one, really. It's what it boils down to, is you are number one, and your wellness and how you manage your stress is key. And then you'll bring that to your students inevitably and support them and manage, hopefully, a calm classroom, because you will be calm and confident and ready yourself. So I have started right here. If you take a look at this little cartoon, I like to start with cartoons because humor is always good. That's a good mental health and stress relieving strategy. So there's a little tip there. But my very first moments in a classroom were chaos. So the literature that I root a lot of my research in is around the fact that as many as 30 to 50% of new teachers will leave the profession in the first 5 years. And I almost left the profession in the first 5 minutes. So I like to show this picture. I found myself substitute teaching at a local school in Saskatoon way back 20 years ago. And I was in there for maybe 5 minutes trying to take attendance, get the students calmed down, and it was utter chaos. This was a grade 7 classroom and nobody would listen to me. The students were making wisecracks, doing their typical 12, 13-year-old things when there is a brand new teacher in the classroom, and they wanted nothing to do with me. If you are absorbing this little picture, you'll notice in the top corner, to me it's in the top right corner, might be your left, depending on how the video is coming through, is the teacher there. And that was me contemplating the end of my career. I really did, in this situation, look out the window, and I could absolutely see myself walking down the street and away from my career. I could not handle it. And in fact, I was actually, when I look back on it, in a moment of panic. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't really see straight. I couldn't really think straight. My brain was completely offline, just not knowing what to do. I had all kinds of lessons and activities prepared, but I did not anticipate such chaos on my very first day. The good news is I didn't leave the profession. I actually took a moment to take a breath, calm myself down. And what I did was just on the fly, I engaged a strategy that I had learned in my internship through an experience of professional development with my cooperating teacher. Now, if you want to take notes on what that early strategy was, it was restitution from Diane Gosson, and she has a website, www.realrestitution.com, and it was from a series of 2 or 3 week long workshops that I attended with Diane Gosson and my cooperating teacher at the time that really, I absorbed the workshop as being a great relationship-based strategy, but I had no idea how much I was going to utilize it throughout my career, because it immediately came to me as the only way that I could think of to settle down this particular class. And it ended up being a strategy that I rooted my entire practice in. So I'll talk about that in a moment, but I will show you some of the other strategies that I've tried throughout the years. Certainly there's this style of teaching. I expect you all to be innovative, critical thinkers who do exactly as I say. That didn't work. That in fact induced more panic on that first day when I tried to lay down the law and be an authoritarian. These students had no idea who I was. They had no relationship with me and really no reason to listen to what I had to say. And so that doesn't work for very long. There's always this potential metaphorical threat. So, well, Timmy, it looks like you've just earned yourself 10 minutes in the cage with Mr. Whiskers. So sometimes as teachers, we pull threats out of the air. We try to think of anything and everything that we can to control a student when we feel like we're losing control. And so this wasn't a very practical strategy, nor did I have access to any wild animals that I could cage and use to control my students long term. And then, of course, there's always this one. You want to be the buddy, and you want to, especially when I was in teaching middle years, you want to see your students as potentially even friends and buddy up and have them like you and respect you from that angle. And so there's always for throwing spitballs in class, I'm sending you to the principal's office. It's nothing personal. It's just a classroom management thing. So defaulting to not my problem, it's what the school expects, go see the principal and have them deal with it. And really, I felt like that was giving my power away. I many times in my early career, especially at King George Community School, we had a protocol of sending students to the principal. And I often felt, even once I had a good relationship with my students, that defaulting to that took away from my relationship. So I have really thoroughly enjoyed rooting my main classroom management practices in K-12 in relationship, in choice theory and control theory. That's William Glasser's work, and he in fact informed Diane Gosson's work with restitution. And since that time, I've morphed and added many different strategies and supports to the evolution of my classroom management style, and that's what you'll see in this presentation this evening or whenever you happen to be watching it. So I'll just slide this out of the way for a minute. So what do we know about teaching in the 21st century? I want to start here because there are a lot of things that we know that aren't so good, and I want to just get that out of the way before we move on to problem solving and seeing solutions and strengths in what we do as a practice. So we know that statistics are, terrible, for lack of a better word. I don't need to list a bunch of them here, but we know that mental health and behavior are a big problem in some of our schools, and that they contribute to being the main top 2 reasons why teachers will leave the profession early on in their career. We know that suicide and self-harm is an issue in our communities, and that beyond that, supporting some of these more severe mental health needs are pressing, and it's in the news, and we talk about it, and it's very, very important when it comes to supporting our students. But often as teachers, we feel like our hands are tied and we don't really know what our role is or how to support our students when it comes to these topics, these very difficult topics sometimes to consider, even when we think about our own journey and our own connection to mental health or suicide and self-harm. We know that there's a lot of fear. So, you know, COVID-19 brought with it, you know, a wave of chaos and confusion and unpredictability. And some people, as teachers or students or parents and families and community members, are fearing for health and safety, and we kind of don't know what to do. And we're hoping that our government and our powers that be step up to support us. And we know that support is an issue in schools. We know that human resources can be hard to come by. I know that when I was teaching, there were many years where I had very high needs in my classroom. I'd sometimes have a third of my students, in some cases 2/3 of my students, on IIP or IEP plans, so intervention support plans for the classroom, and no EA time, no assistant in the classroom. And so we really have to think on our feet as teachers and try to figure out how to be resourceful with very little resources. And sometimes that's just the reality of where we teach and where we work. And we know that some teachers are only barely surviving over thriving. So we want to do different, and that's what most of this presentation is about, supporting you to be well in your practice and find some things that you can do to help you look forward to this great career, because I'm here 20 years later, still loving teaching despite facing some tough stuff and some hard things over the last 20 years. And that's what I hope to share with young pre-service teachers as you think about transitioning into your career. So in addition to all that sort of negatively viewed stuff, we know a lot of other positive things as well. We know that relationships can change everything. We know that connection reduces fear. We know that emotions can be co-regulated. So when I'm struggling, if I figure out a way to manage and there are other people in the space, they might soak that up by osmosis practically. And it's, you know, the mirror neurons and the human connection, we can really share how we manage our own emotions with those in the space that we're in, if we have that figured out ourselves. We know that resilience can be fostered, and this is really cool because the research 25 years ago didn't always tell us that resilience could be fostered. We sometimes viewed it back then as something that you were either born with or you were born without. But we know now today that resilience can be fostered, and I think it's a huge responsibility and role of us as educators to not only know this, but to support our students to be resilient themselves and teach them those skills. We also know that we have power over our well-being. So there are a few things I'm going to teach you tonight that will support your own well-being. We have a lot more power than we might think. We don't need to succumb to stress, feel powerless to stress, feel like it's always up to someone else or something to help us manage our stress. It really just comes down to how much we know that we can put into place to help ourselves to be well, and that we can be taught to cope, manage, and support one another. So those are some key things that I want you to remember throughout the presentation and think about first as you head into this journey of positive co-managing in your future classrooms. So I think of this whole entire process as kind of 3-step. The first piece is aware, the second piece is care, and the third piece, or third and fourth, is cope and manage. So aware, care, cope, and then manage. So that's the progression of how we'll go throughout our time together. One of the first things I like to do when I work with or present to students, especially when I have a very short amount of time, is run you through a quick little self-assessment or evaluation. So get a pen or a highlighter and some paper handy, and get ready to just do a little reflection or a rating scale for yourself, and feel free to pause this or screenshot it if you want to, so you can think about it a little bit longer than the time that I give you to run through this, because I'm going to go through it rather quickly so that I don't take up too much of our time waiting for that piece. But your rating scale is 0 to 5. 0, I have no capacity for this. I have no knowledge about this. I have no idea what you're talking about. 5, I have a great deal of capacity for this or knowledge in this area, and I've implemented these strategies, and this is a big part of my life. So 0, not knowledgeable. 5, very knowledgeable. And this work comes out of my research with in-service early career teachers in Saskatchewan. I've done some work with teachers who are new to their career and thriving, and I've disseminated from the data from that work what it is that contributed to them thriving in their career. And I use that to teach other teachers and other people how to be competent and confident, more importantly, in their own ability to thrive over barely survive in their work. So the first thing is mindset. And this is, sorry, I can't read it there. It's kind of covered up. But basically, it's a growth-oriented mindset versus a fixed mindset. And thinking about how I head into my relationships and my practice with self and others. Do I allow myself to make mistakes? Do I look for opportunities and lessons? Or am I more fixed or closed-minded when it comes to considering my practice or those with whom I work? The next one is meaning. Am I guided by a sense of purpose? Do my work and play have significance? So again, you're rating yourself on each one. There are 5 M's, 0 to 5 in terms of your capacity for these ideas. The next one is mental health. So do I understand the role of stress and stress emotions? They are anger, anxiety, depression. We're familiar with those. Do I have suicide or mental health first aid or training? Do I practice self-care myself and understand the impact of trauma and trauma-informed care on myself and my students, knowing that we're all on a journey when it comes to our mental health? Do I understand the role of self-regulation in learning? So what is the power in me regulating my own emotions in supporting and managing my classroom? And can I utilize basic reframing strategies and principles of personal power to influence my own and others' well-being? And we're going to run through some of these things tonight. And if there's anything there that you're wondering, what is that? I want to ask more about that. Feel free to ask that when we meet live. The next piece is mentorship. It's a huge piece that's important in our success in schools. And what's I want young teachers or new pre-service teachers to think about when it comes to mentorship is A, do I see the importance of relationship, collaboration, and camaraderie with my peers and mentors? And do I seek help from and support others in their work? So do I even see myself as a mentor or someone with knowledge and experience that others might not have? Even though I am new in my role, I'm in a novice position, I do have the ability and the capacity to potentially support others. And do I know how to foster resilience in myself and others? And then the last piece is the management piece. So really, when I think of classroom management, I think of it as all of these pieces. That management itself is one of maybe 5 possible ways that we consider how we support our students in our classroom, and better yet, support ourselves in that space as well. So when it comes to management, I think of this in a couple of ways. Do I manage my own emotions under stress? Do I have effective communication skills? Am I confident in the face of conflict? Do I have courageous conversations, so those hard conversations? And do I know about practices of effective management routines that we might use in the classroom? And do I promote self-discipline in myself and my students? So this is, as I said, the 5M areas came out of my research with in-service teachers who were thriving in their work. And what I found was that they had the capacity for all of these things. And it was really a huge contributing factor to their success in the classroom. So that's why I ask you to evaluate yourself and think about these areas. And if there's an area that feels like it's lacking, that's an area you'd want to do some self-investment in. So some professional and personal development in these areas if you wanted to be able to support your own capacity. And really, the capacity is for resilience. It's for relationship, resourcefulness, and routines. And so the teachers that I worked with in Saskatchewan were resilient, relational, or relationship-based, resourceful educators who were routined. So again, I'd like you to pause the video and rate yourself in these 4 R areas, and then as we go throughout the rest of the presentation, you could even create a little graphic organizer with each of the 4 R areas in one corner of a maybe squared off piece of paper, and jot down things you learn that fit into the different categories. So if you learn something that could help you build capacity for resilience, jot it down for yourself under resilience, and the same with relational or resourcefulness or routines, because these really are practices that are going to directly translate to what you can do in your classroom to support a positive management system. And then, as I said, bring any questions to our live session together. So the first thing I ask teachers to consider really overall when we think back on that self-assessment piece from a few minutes ago is, how do I actually cope and manage with my own stress emotions or my own tough stuff? We know that when we see behaviors in classrooms, that there is a stress response happening inside that student. There's something difficult that they're dealing with or managing either in the moment or that came with them to school that day. And before we can even begin to help them calm and manage and cope with their difficult situations, we have to consider how we do that for ourselves. So we're actually sharing with students something we already know how to do. So these are just some questions I would pose for self-reflection. Again, take a minute, ask yourself, jot down your answers to these questions, and you might see some answers staring back at you on the page in front of you. You might be able to teach yourself something about yourself that's going to help you grow and move forward. So are you calm? What do you know about your own stress response system? If the answer is nothing, I'm going to teach you a little bit here in the next hour, so not to worry. What do you know about yourself and your own go-to emotions? Again, we're going to do a little exercise around that. How do you prevent and manage your own emotions or your own stress? And do you have a plan to prevent ill health or burnout? Because we know that our minds and bodies are connected physiologically. So what I'm thinking up here often translates into feelings in my body: headaches, backache, stomach ache. All kinds of issues can happen with my physiological system just based on my thoughts. So I can create ill or well health myself with how I think about and support myself as an educator. And burning out means literally burning out, right? So we're burning up all of the good, happy hormones and chemicals in our body that are there and meant to support us. That one's called serotonin. And we're way too full. We're over the top full with cortisol, which is one of the stress hormones. Again, I'm keeping it really simple with when it comes to explaining this. So feel free to ask questions when we meet live, but really that's what it is. I've burned up all the good chemicals in my body and I only have the bad ones left. And that's when burnout actually physically happens to us. And then the very last thing I ask every human to think about when they are considering how they're going to manage themselves and a community of people or a classroom of people is, who are your go-to people who are going to help you unload, unpack, and manage your stress? So you might want to also take a minute and jot down the names of those people, because it's important that you have a small cohort, maybe within your home or your family or peers in school, or the places that you work, who you can talk to and who can support you with your stress, or even a therapist or counselor, or someone in the community, your doctor, who you can reach out to. Those are number one. And I make sure that I have my go-to people so that I don't hang on to unneeded or unwanted stress. And I make sure that I have people outside of my circle, like a counselor, doctor, therapist, someone I can talk to when things are too tough for me to manage myself. And when I have that in check, I'm aware and recognizing when my students or someone else might need that too. And I can make those suggestions stigma-free to support all of us to be mentally well and healthy during this tough time. And I have at the bottom here, you know, we set the tone. Monkey see, monkey do is actually rooted in science. We have mirror neurons. What I see other people doing in my environment, I'm apt to copy and to emulate, and in addition to feel. So if I live or work or go to school or spend time in a classroom where there's a lot of stress and chaos, then I'm taking that on myself. So as the teacher, you can imagine that's not a good thing. And as a student in that classroom, that's not a good thing either. My behaviors, my negative behaviors, are going to escalate if I'm in a space where I'm being triggered and my stress response system is going off or firing. So we want to think about how we cope and manage to support the best management system in our classroom. And that's what I really see as the educator's role: to understand, number one, and then help regulate emotions in the classroom. That's the best classroom management starting point or philosophy. So I understand how my body works. I regulate my own emotions. I move from relationships with myself to relationships with others, and I support them in the same manner, and I model that tone of calm. I teach the lacking skills that I see amongst my students, and then I teach the curriculum. So that's one of the first things that I did in that chaotic classroom was I asked the students what they needed and what they wanted, and we created a conversation and a vocabulary around that. And I taught them what I wanted to see from them. And more importantly, they taught me what they needed from me. And we worked in a mutually agreeable relationship from there to then move to the curriculum. And especially during this time, it's so important that you set the tone for that emotional relationship and the expectations first around the emotional piece, the social emotional well-being, before you get to the curriculum. And if you do that, it's probably in the curriculum anyway, because I know the K-12 curriculum has broad areas of learning and cross-curricular competencies that bridge all areas of social, emotional, and mental health and spiritual well-being. So chances are that's already in the curriculum. But if we do that first, it's going to lessen the degree of management issues that we're going to have down the road, because we're going to have built a relationship and we're going to be in a supportive, symbiotic environment that's working well together and not hiding from or trying to constantly consequence or just plow through the learning without considering the needs of the space. So I think it's hugely important, and it's number one in a calm classroom anyway, and for a positive management system. So I like to frame our understanding of health before I move forward in terms of thinking about classroom management, because as I said, that starts with you. So we really have to have an understanding, and I did mention it a little bit. I like to think of health on a spectrum, and I want you to imagine that if you are human, you have mental health. And so at any point in time, any of us are susceptible to becoming ill, and any of us are have the ability or the capacity to be well. So we want to pay attention to our stress in order to understand where we're at on that system. Sometimes what I do with groups such as this, and always in my classroom, is a stress level check-in. So you could create a 0 to 10 scale, just like the 0 to 5 scale that I gave you earlier for the self-assessment, and assess your stress level. So take today, for example. If you were to look at your health and well-being on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being very, very exhausted, potentially ill with anger, anxiety, or depression, or major mood complications, just not a very good day or time in your life, to a 10, you're extremely well, you have a great perspective on your life, and you have stress under control. Where would you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? And go ahead and take a minute and jot that down. And then when you're done, I want you to consider that 7 to 10 would be relatively well. That would mean you have a little bit of stress in your life and you're managing. And stress is important. Stress is good for us. It motivates us, and it keeps us getting up every day and ready to face the world. And it can actually motivate us to do some pretty spectacular things when it comes to getting tasks done and thinking about learning in new areas of our life and expanding our horizons, pursuing our passions. Stress motivates a lot of that. So it's good. 7 to 10 is a great place to be. But I do want you to consider, if you are anywhere around the 5 to 7 zone, that you might be experiencing some frustration, some burnout, some exhaustion. So you might not be filling up those good stress hormones. You might be depleting a lot of that, and you're slipping down a little bit. And you want to be aware of that, because if you go below a 5, if you dip down to a point where anger or anxiety or depression is starting to set in, and it's a regular part of your day, that's where you want to reach out for help. And you want to know your own scale so that you can be aware of when you need to reach out for help. So I always suggest to people in caregiving professions to be aware of how they're feeling and what that's like for them and what their threshold is for reaching out for help. And I teach these scales to my students. So in every classroom I've ever taught in, K to 12, for the majority of my career, we did a temperature and stress level check-in at the beginning of every single day, and sometimes twice a day. And students would write down just their numbers. We would go around and share our numbers so we could get a sense of the mood of the room, but students wouldn't have to attach any reasons or divulge any personal information with those numbers. It was just for me to get a quick assessment of the room, and for the room to get a quick assessment of each other, because as you'll learn, learn. A calm classroom is a space where we all kind of know how each other is doing, we can support one another, and we can regulate based on each other's emotions. So if I do a quick assessment of my students at the beginning of every day, then I know who I need to go to support if I see their numbers getting low. I'm just keeping a mental note of that as the numbers are being shared around the room. So if you want to ask questions about that, jot that down as something you want to explore further when we meet live. I'm happy to talk more about that. But you want to know yourself, you want to teach others to know themselves, and seek help when you're getting low. So the other thing to know about stress is that stress emotions live deep in our brain. And I always use Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain to explain this. And I will explain it really quickly and touch more on it when we meet live. But if I was to orient this fist to my head, okay, this is just like a little mini model of my brain. And what I like about this model is I can take it anywhere with me. And I always have a hand model of the brain. And I can explain this to, and I have explained this to kids as young as preschool. And I've explained it to adult groups. So it never gets old with learning about the brain and how it impacts our lives. So with my brain model, deep in the brain here is the amygdala. And that's the part of my limbic system and the inner part of my brain that's regulating my stress emotions, my mad, sad, or scared, or getting triggered. That happens deep inside my brain. Out here at the front, that's another important part. That's my prefrontal cortex, or my cortex, and that's the thinking part of my brain. And then just the third part, to keep it real simple, is my brainstem. And this is the piece back here. So my brain, all of my thoughts and the hormones and chemicals associated with those thoughts get sent down my brainstem and disseminated throughout my body. So what I'm thinking or reacting to with some of my deep emotions or thoughts connected to those emotions are signals being sent to my body all the time about how that's impacting me or my sense of well-being. So what can happen in a classroom with you as the teacher or as the student is we can just, be using our prefrontal cortex, working along, doing a math question, and all of a sudden the teacher calls our name and says, Jack, can you come to the front of the room and write down your answer to the question? Jack is nervous, doesn't know the answer, is a little bit afraid, and boom, he goes offline, or she goes offline, or they go offline. And what I mean by this explanation is that our fear sensors are deep in our midbrain, and they are just always wired to be aware of the environment and active to pay attention to things that are stressful. And they're going to go offline and send all kinds of signals to our body when they sense a threat. And, a million years ago, that threat might have been a lion, a tiger, a bear, as we navigated the terrain as hunters and gatherers. But today it's often not something as physical as that. It's a perceived threat, like I need to go and answer a question and I don't know the answer, or I've come into the lunchroom with my lunch tray and there's no one to sit with and everybody's turning their back on me, and that can send me offline. What's important to know when we're triggered or offline is you can visually see with this model, the thinking part of my brain is not the part that's activated. It's the emotional part of the brain. And so we call that fight, flight, freeze, also known as, when I talk to young people, mad, sad, or scared. And when those emotions set in and stay, they can become anger, anxiety, and depression. So when we're deep in those emotions, we're not thinking. The thinking part of our brain goes offline, and the emotional part is reacting to keep us safe and alive. So it has a very valid purpose. It's just not behaving in a way that's socially practical for maybe the classroom. Maybe I'm going to exhibit a behavior and I'm not going to be able to think through, and I'm going to act impulsively and maybe get upset or redirect your attention to something else because I don't know what to do or how to react. So it's important that we understand a little bit about this brain, mind, body connection, because as teachers, if we have a student who's offline for any reason, and it could be a real stress in the room that we can see physically and we know what's stressing the student out, or it could be something that's perceived by them that we can't see, and they're offline, often as teachers, we come to them with our online brain and we try to engage the student in conversation, and we try to talk them through it, or we go straight to consequences, or try to rationalize, and that's not happening when a student's offline. So that correlates to this other picture, which is Bruce Perry's model. And I will speak to that if you want to, and we're live. But Bruce Perry talks about sort of this upside down triangle of the brain. And what he's talking about is we can only reason when we're online and it's all intact. If I'm offline, then you can see at the bottom of Bruce Perry's model, the first thing I need to engage is a regulation strategy to help get that brain online again. I can't reason until I regulate and or relate with that student. So the only thing I'm going to do as a teacher coming to a student who's offline is attempt to regulate them. So anything I can do to help bring them online. And you know, that may just be time. Sometimes regulation takes nothing but time. And so I can, if it's a big explosion of emotion, I can do nothing. And if nobody's going to potentially be hurt, that student will come back online, because we know that our emotions are a wave, not a rocket ship. So they're not going to go to the moon and stay offline forever. It's human physiology that we will calm down, usually very quickly. So they don't last more than a few minutes. And we have to help that regulation strategy, that calm happen. We can do that through relationship before we begin reasoning or talking to the prefrontal cortex. And what I see all the time in sort of what you might imagine as classroom management nightmares, or situations where teachers are fired up, students are fired up, and it's a highly stressful situation, is there are people who are online trying to talk to people who are offline, and it's not working. And then by the time that person calms down, this person's offline, and you just have a whole bunch of misfiring happening in the space. And sometimes just simple knowledge of knowing that we have to wait till everybody's online before we can continue to problem solve this situation is all that we need to calm down or support success in the learning environment. So I'm going to pause right here with the recording so we can move on to part 2, and I can just check in how we're doing for time. All right, welcome back. So we were right on time at about the halfway point. So I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to go over by too much. So took a look at my PowerPoint just to check in. So that's the aware piece, is that whole awareness around stress emotions, the brain, how that's happening in the classroom, and just a little bit of a background on in terms of what's happening in the environment and what we can do to help mitigate that and manage that, just with considering our own emotions and how stress plays into that. So moving forward, I do like to do a little bit of a couple of exercises around considering your stress emotions and your own emotion management, because it's important that we know that number one, our stress response can either escalate or calm a situation in the classroom. We play a huge role, 50% of that role, in whether or not a situation in a classroom is going to escalate and get out of control, or whether or not it's going to calm down and we're going to be able to get online collectively as a group. So we're going to start with your stress response system, considerations about how you feel and how you manage your own triggers, because knowledge is power. So number one, I want you to think about what you know about your own emotional triggers. I want you to pay attention to what pushes your buttons, become aware of the bodily sensations when you start to feel stressed, and pay attention to what your body's telling you you need in that moment, and write down some tricks or techniques that you can use to implement when you're triggered. And if you want to pause this and work through these 5 steps, please do, because these reflective activities are going to go a long way when you find yourself in a classroom in a stressful situation. But I'm going to walk you through a little exercise right now. So as I told you, our stress emotions, fight, flight, or freeze, equate to mad, sad, or scared. So we're going to work with those 3 emotions, and I want you to consider rating those as your, what would be your go-to of those 3 emotions, and put them in order from 1 2, and 3. So if we're thinking about this as human beings, we have different go-tos. Some of us, when a stress happens, real or perceived, we go immediately to fight, or it's more of our nature to go to flight. And it's in some of our nature to just freeze. We aren't quite sure what to do. And biologically, our go-to is pretty genetic. So I want you to think about when you are triggered with an emotion, and it could be that a giant bear popped into the room, or it could just be that a student is refusing to listen to you, or your child is refusing to do what you've asked them to do. That's a common one that I think about when I consider my own stress emotions. When I've asked my child to clean their room for the 7th time, and it's not happening, and mom is starting to go offline. And for me, my go-to is mad. I will go to mad, and then I will go to scared before I go to sad. So my go-to would be mad, scared, sad. So take a minute and order yours. Yours might be the complete opposite. When you're getting frustrated or upset, you might go straight to sad. Mad might be your last go-to, but order your stress emotions in terms of what you go to first when you think you go offline. Now, what I'd like you to do is take your first one. So if it was me doing this exercise, I'm thinking right now about mad. So I want you thinking about your go-to stress emotion. Have it in your mind. And now jot down, what color is it? And I am going to purposely give you some time to do this. What's your go-to emotion? What color is it? So please assign it a color. And now I want you to consider, what shape is it? Okay, and maybe what size is it? And lastly, I want you now to consider that this emotion is your friend. And what is it telling you you need? So our emotions are always telling us something, and deeply rooted in that emotion is a need. When we go offline, it's because something that we value or that we want to protect has been compromised. It could be our life, that we need to run for our life from a rabid dog, but it could also be that somebody has taken my hat, and that's a prized possession. It could be that I value my safety and security, and I've been asked to be vulnerable in the classroom, and that's causing me to go offline. It could be that someone's making fun of me and they're harming me personally or emotionally, that I feel compromised in terms of the social situation in the classroom. Someone who was my friend is no longer my friend, and as teachers, we've got to pay attention to that social milieu in the space of the classroom. So if you know that your emotions are telling you something about what you need, I want you to remember that your students' emotions are also telling you something about what they need. And that's important to consider going forward. So if we go back to you for a moment, I want to talk a little bit about this faction of, compassion through to burnout, and how teachers kind of roll through that and how we mitigate that. So we go into this career with compassion, satisfaction, and hopefully a decent amount of stress, and loving our job, and it is stressful, but we enjoy it and we're doing well. But that can very quickly turn to fatigue and burnout. And if we're working with a particularly traumatic population of students, or low socioeconomic status, or lots of trauma in the community, then we can start to, if we've gone past burnout, we can start to absorb that trauma like we are living it ourselves, and that is not a good place to be. So when we consider our stress emotions and the power they have over us, so stress is constantly coming in, we have to be able to do something to help either A, bring us back online, or better yet, get upstream of that and do things in our lives that help us not to go offline so easily. And there are a few ways that we can do that to support ourselves so that the whole stress response cycle is able to do that, cycle through. Stress comes in, stress goes out. Stress comes in and stress goes out. And that's a healthy system. When it's coming in and staying, however, that's when we're more apt to go to strategies in the classroom that are harmful in terms of management versus stress strategies that are helpful. So how do I manage my stress? How do I get upstream of my stress? Well, I do all of the things that we are all well aware of we should be doing. You know, I'm eating properly, drinking water, getting lots of sleep, and getting a little bit of exercise. But there's also some things that I can do that maybe people don't pay too much attention to. I can spend some time with my breath. I can think about breathing and slowing down my breath, maybe even do some meditation or some mindful exercises. I can move in any way. I don't have to run a 5K to get rid of stress. I could sit in my desk and squeeze my fists as tight as I can and release them, or my legs or my arms or any part of my body, and I can release that energy. It can happen that way. A simple walk at lunch hour could be enough, or standing up and doing some stretches. Any kind of movement can help to release the cycle. And then I want to be able to rest, relax, and have fun when I've got downtime. And if I take a step back and I'm mindful about my role in the school, I can maybe imagine where I draw my boundaries for taking in other people's stress. And I certainly want to make sure that in my downtime, I'm limiting stress increasing behaviors like substance use and, you know, a lack of sleep and things like that that are going to contribute to depleting me even further. So any of the activities that we can do where we're going to create laughter, tears, time with friends, a great movie, a bath, meditating, spiritual components, any of those things can be self-care components. Time with me to unwind and de-stress, and just make sure I've got some armor to the potential for stress in my work environment to eat me alive or burn me out. And we don't want that, because that's when classroom management is going to be very, very difficult. So when it comes to thinking about all of this, self-care, mental health, managing stress, some people ask, okay, so I'm in this you know, position because I want to be a teacher, not a therapist. So do I need to be able to be a therapist in order to be a teacher? And the answer to that is absolutely not. But what you do want to do is be therapeutic in your role. So we can be teachers who are therapeutic, not teachers who are therapists, okay? So that's where we draw the line, because the power is in co-regulation. Ram Dass says we are all just walking each other home. And really, that's what we're doing in our environments, in our homes, in our classrooms, in our communities, especially given COVID-19. Those of us who are coping and managing and able to help others, we're taking our turn walking each other home and helping each other through tough stuff. And when I can manage my tough stuff, I can walk you home through yours. And I can hope that if I can't manage, that you're going to eventually be managing and you can help me. And that's how human beings were meant to coexist and support one another with care and connection through well-being. And what's neat about knowing this is I've worked in the world of therapy. I'm a practicing therapeutic counselor, and the top three therapeutic approaches to supporting other human beings in care are, number one, relationships. So it doesn't matter, you could toss out every single approach there is under the sun in terms of clinical care or therapy, and it doesn't matter what the therapist is using if they don't have a relationship. That's key. That's what we know from the research around therapy and interventions from that angle. And that cognitive behavioral therapies and mindful based therapies come second in line to relationship. And if you have any combination of these top three approaches to supporting other human beings in a therapeutic therapeutic relationship, then you have an 80 or 90% or higher success rate of supporting that human to manage their emotions and their stress and be well. And so the cool thing about this knowledge is that this translates directly to the classroom. So we don't have to be therapists, but we can build relationships with our students, and we can engage them cognitively and behaviorally through the activities that we do in the classroom to bring calm into the space and support thinking about emotions and the power that our emotions have over our well-being. So teaching what you know about stress and emotions to your students can have a huge impact in the classroom and support management of stress in that cycle. So that connection helps to build resilience. So the final piece, as I said, is we utilize all these tools then. Now we have this awareness, we have some coping tools, and we're going to come with our aware and our care for self and others to manage successfully, cope and manage in the classroom environment. So if we have any classroom environment, we'll take any classroom on the planet. This could be any one of the 20 or so that I taught in over the last couple of decades. What we're going to see is this old iceberg analogy. When I look out amongst the sea of students in any space, I'm going to see behavior and things that I need to manage. That's barely scraping the surface of what's actually happening in the space. So what's happening in the space are a ton of needs, a ton of stress and stress response systems that are being activated in the space. There are some students with skills and there are students with a lack of skills. There are the belief systems of the people in the space and the relationships and connections that are happening amongst students and themselves and them and you and them and even the broader community or the school. There are mindsets in the space. What do we believe about how people learn, how people manage, and how people are well? And then there's my whole repertoire of instructional strategies or organizational or management strategies. So there's a lot actually happening in a classroom. If I was to look in, as I said, from the outside and see behaviors or management happening in the space, it's just the tip of the iceberg with what's really underneath. And to develop a positive and effective and functional classroom management system, you want to consider all that's under the surface in planning for your management system. And as I said, you can consider some of the people I talked about earlier in the video. I use Diane Gosson's restitution to support me in understanding this, but there are many systems and authors out there who help us understand these pieces. There's Gordon Neufeld, Bruce Perry, Dan Siegel. They all have books on parenting and teaching related understandings that bridge parenting and teaching, and neurosequential brain-based models that help us understand how people live and work together and coexist successfully. And they've all been part of supporting me in building a classroom management system that works. And it worked for me for many years. So we're going to attack each piece of this one by one really briefly. So beliefs are number one. Number one, you want to kick limiting beliefs to the curb. So I fully believe that anyone can do anything given the time and support that they need to get there. And we don't always have the time and support to help all of our students, but we can't imagine that they have a cap or a roof on their ability. We have to imagine that anyone can do anything. So when I imagine some of the really tough stories where people came from an underdog situation and conquered when it comes to their brain and how they learn and function, these are my top go-tos. Temple Grandin, and a woman with autism who is, today functioning at a very high level as a PhD in animal science. She's written many books and participated in many programs or supports, came from very challenging situation with severe autism, presenting autism. Helen Keller, we know the story of Helen Keller and the support that she had from a supportive nanny, AKA teacher in her life, who completely revolutionized her skill. Ron Kaufman, his family was the designer of, I believe it was called the Sunrise Program, or is called the Sunrise Program. Again, another human with autism who is a success story. Barbara Arrowsmith is the founder or co-founder of a resource-based program for young people with learning disabilities, who she herself conquered a learning disability. And Jim Quick, I recently just read his book and added him to the list from, I believe his book is actually called Limitless. And he had a traumatic brain injury as a young child in kindergarten and was labeled the boy with the broken brain, and his parents were not willing to give up on him. And all of these stories are success stories because of the people who put the time and effort into supporting them in their life endeavors. And we as teachers can only do so much, but I want you to remember that we can do so much. And don't put limits on what you think your students are capable of just based on the labels that they come to the classroom with. Have high expectations for your students. I always had high expectations. And what I did was I worked to teach my kids or students skills to reach those expectations versus lowering the expectations and making assumptions that they couldn't rise to the occasion. And are there cases where I do have to lower the expectations? Of course, but always start with those high expectations and considering building up your students' skills. Really, again, when it comes to beliefs, we want to consider what do our students need and want and believe is important. And if I understand that and share with them vice versa, what I believe and what I need and what I want, we can create a classroom culture or system conditions for success based on those beliefs. And they are hugely important in working with young people, understanding what they believe in and what they want. If you remember, I told you that our stress response it gets activated. So anger, for example, or a behavior management issue that might come up, it's always protecting a need. So when we understand what our students need, we can often prevent upstream behavior issues from even happening. So a lot of our classroom management is happening before there's an issue. And that's how I would run most of my class. Well, I ran all my classes that way. So 80% of what I was doing in classroom management was upstream. 20% was in the moment solving problems with students that, you know, may have happened inevitably. So when it comes to our instructional design of the classroom, a lot of classroom management can be positively supported by just creating a culture that is exciting and active and learning. So students have choices, opportunity, it's interest-based. They've got a lot of control around what they do. There's inquiry happening in the space, and it's cooperation. Students are working together, and it's an alive, active classroom space, and everybody's collaborating. In these spaces, contrary to what you might think, even though they're noisy and active and there's lots happening, they are not chaotic classrooms. They are relatively calm, learning, and inspired. And so lots of you know, things that we would expect to be happening in the classroom are happening in these spaces. So sometimes it's just about letting go of that control a little bit, knowing what the expectations are, and setting your students free to engage in active learning opportunities. Another thing to consider is skill versus will. So when I think about students, this is from Ross Green's work. If there is a behavior problem or something happening, a classroom management issue, what I'm going to do is reframe that. I'm not going to think about the student actively misbehaving or doing something that is meant to trigger me or upset me. That would be will, and a battle of the wills is nothing I want to get into. But I'm going to frame a classroom management concern as a student lacking a skill. So if a student is not problem solving, if a student is bullying or something I might call manipulating or being bad, any of that terminology that might come along with me labeling it as will, then I'm going to reframe that, because our students come to us with skills and a lack of skills. So I'm going to look for what that student needs to be supported in and help them to get there and teach that skill versus seeing it as will. And when we just reward or consequence the will of a behavior problem, then we're avoiding the root of the problem. Like I said, and the skill or lack thereof is often at that root. So these are just some quotes that speak to that, and I'll let you pause it and give them a read if you want to, but I'm going to move on to the next concept. Oh yeah, and this is a great Alfie Kohn quote. I can't imagine a situation in which we would remove the chance for students to learn how to make good choices more than I can imagine a situation where we would remove the chance for them to learn how to read. And so that really reinforces for me why I'm here to teach skills for students, even when it comes to behavior and managing emotions, not just when it comes to the academic piece. So when we're problem solving with students, we want to engage students when their prefrontal cortex is online. So when there's an incident in my classroom, anytime there was an incident, and I had many over 20 years, I had violent incidents, I had students, a student one time throw a desk across the room, I've dealt with fights in my classroom, I've had probably you name it when it comes to thinking about things that could have gone wrong or sideways in my time teaching pre-K to 12. I'm never going to engage students' prefrontal cortex in that moment. I need to get everybody apart and keep students safe if it comes down to that, and give the student a chance to calm down. And then We're going to identify problems and brainstorm solutions, and then try to move forward. And really what this comes down to is there a piece in this that I need to own? Did I set something off? Did I participate in this by missing something? And other situations I might need to say, is this a hill I want to die on? Am I in an argument with a student that I'm not going to win in this moment? And if they have the hat on, or if they're chewing gum, can I just let this go and talk about it with them privately, where we can choose a mutually agreeable solution to the problem? I don't need to always push it. And I've found that one many times. I had to learn through lots of trial and error that you know, I don't need to die on every hill. I can let some things go and move on with the lesson and deal with it later. And then check in. So if I have problem solved with a student and we've come to a great solution, every now and then I want to check in and see if that's still working. So in this, I want to be able to, in all of my classroom management, I want to be able to show empathy. I want to remain neutral myself and not get angry, agitated, triggered. I want to stay curious. I'm always going to ask my students, tell me more about that. So if a student is defending something, defending an action, or something that they want to do, I'm just going to ask them to tell me more, give me more information, and maybe I'm going to get to something that I understand more fully, and I'm going to allow it or approach it a little bit differently. And always communicate concerns and issues with students, their families, other people in the school who can help you, and invite solutions from that round table. Anybody can participate in solution finding when it comes to some of your tough stuff, and take it slow. And when you need to, just start the cycle again, the problem solving cycle, if people get frustrated or upset. So when I think of classroom management and I think about all this, I really go back to, and this is a point where I got to early to mid in my career, you know, what is my goal as an educator, really? Am I here to teach skills, or am I here to reward and consequence? And this is where I fully situate myself in the skill building, developmental, attachment, relationship-based approaches to classroom management. I stay as far away from rewards and consequences as I can, because I feel like they scrape the surface and they don't necessarily help to teach skills. Not to say that 100% of my philosophy is rooted in this. I would say, sometimes I say 80-20, but when I think about it realistically, it's 90-10. I'm 90% in the teaching skills and looking at the root of a student's need when it comes to a behavior issue. Do they have a need for safety or security, a need to be loved or to belong? Do they have a need for power and control that I can help them meet, or a need to have fun and be free a little bit, versus looking at this as will? Are they trying to escape and avoid? Are they looking for a reward? Are they looking for attention? You know, I find those to be more labeling the what of the student versus the why. And in terms of my human curriculum and my support for positive classroom management strategies over the years, I always wanted to find out why, because if I can get to the why, I can get to the root of the problem and I can problem solve with that student out of it. Now, as I said, every now and then, you know, there are some students, some situations where a reward or a consequence is going to quickly solve a problem, but I've never found that over time that was a long-term solution for me. And you know, part of the reason why, again, I'm not going to read through this whole slide, but part of the reason why is that relationships build long-term success. Many of our students are coming to school, especially if you worked or you work like I did, either in mental health or in a high needs community or environment, you're going to find that many students are coming to school with their attachment needs disrupted. And really, my role is to support that and to teach skills. And, you know, it's typically the more secure students who can accept a challenge and be independent and competent and manage their emotions anyway, who are going to respond to reward and consequence. Reward and consequence oftentimes will send those students who are more insecure, avoidant, resistant, oppositional, offline. They're too disorganized and maybe even too offline to think about the importance of the reward or the consequence. It might work immediately very quickly and very short term, but it's not necessarily going to last long term. What I have to go to for long-term gain and benefit with these tough students is a relationship. And I'm not going to do that with candy or money. I'm going to do that with how we work together, how I understand that student and build trust with them, and how we problem solve together down the road. So I have some names here of some education and psychological gurus who help to swim in this side, I guess, of attachment, relationship development, therapies or classroom management approaches versus the behavioral consequence reward oriented side of things. So if you are interested in any of those resources, as I said, I will speak to them or bring them to our live session. So I'm going to summarize this with the foundation of calm classrooms and a few steps that you can take. There is no recipe for this, but if there was a recipe, this is what I would kind of boil it down to. That number one, being aligned with your students empowers your students and empowers you as the teacher. And so if you can have an aligned classroom management philosophy, something rooted in a belief system and that is relationship based, then you're going to empower everybody in the space. And, you know, very little can go wrong. Can things go sideways in that space? Absolutely. No management system is perfect, but you are going to have the relationship to back you up when things do go wrong. So number one, create the conditions. Help to create a culture where beliefs are supported, expectations are set, and classroom norms are understood. I often build the classroom management system with the students. I ask them, what do you want from me? I share with them what I want from them. We build a vocabulary. We do something called my job, your job, or leader learner. So we say in this classroom, if we want to be safe, respected, happy, and have fun and learn, you know, keep it, I always say narrow to 3 and agree when it comes to any rules or expectations or norms. So often it's something like that. And I say, okay, so if we want to have those elements in our classroom, what's my job as the teacher to make sure that happens? And what's your job as the student to make sure that happens? And a simple T-chart and an unpacking of those lists can help to get that conversation going and get those rules or expectations understood. So I actually create the rules in all of my classrooms with the students. I don't come with a preset list of rules, because part of building relationship and trust with my students is asking them to tell me what they expect, and I help them get there. And then that can create a language for down the road. So if something's going wrong, I can say, you know, that doesn't fall in line with what you told me you believe. And, you know, you said you believed in respect and having fun. And right now, not everybody's having fun based on these choices you're making. How can we do things differently? And that invites conversation and problem solving. And that's what I spoke to there, the whole notion of co-constructed norms. So we all work together in a classroom to decide on that, what we expect for behavior in the classroom. And then again, this is the curious part. I'm going to ask more than I tell. So tell me more. Does this fit with what you have said or what you know? Can we fix it? One of the foundational tenets of restitution is creating the conditions where students can make mistakes and return stronger. And when students know that they can make mistakes, they can go offline and do something that doesn't fall in line with their beliefs, whether it's impulsive or it's an accident or whatever it is. When they know they can fix that mistake, then they often come back online a lot quicker and they're more willing to problem solve. And then we're just going to listen and align our agendas together with the students, because we really do all want the same things. We want to be safe, we want to be understood, we want to be respected, we want to have fun and a little bit of freedom and control, so we can do those things. And that builds capacity for resilience in human beings. It teaches skills and it allows us to understand that we can get along and support one another, and I'm going to help you get there and you're going to help me get there. And it's going to be, as I said, a symbiotic, a successful or productive symbiotic relationship. So this stays away from all of these not so beneficial strategies, really. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're threatening, bribing, trying to control things like whether or not a student can go to the bathroom or eat their lunch or take a break, or you're randomly enforcing petty rules. You know, the rule is no hats, and so, you know, and you're dying on that hill. If you're humiliating a student, then you want to know that's bordering on abuse and bullying behavior. If you're socially isolating students regularly or the norm as a consequence, or participating, God forbid, in corporal punishment, these are not trauma-informed, not human-informed elements of care that should be happening in any school or classroom or even home. So I don't subscribe to any of this. And if you take any trauma-informed training, and you don't even need to take trauma-informed training to know that these are not human-informed practices. Human-informed practices understand the human being. The practices support needs and beliefs. They work to align, and they don't work on you know, rules and punishment. That's for another institution other than the classroom. So I will end on that note. I'm just going to take a quick look here. Yeah, there's a couple of slides there that I'm going to save for the live conversation. I always say, yeah, it's smartest to co-regulate. This is a little poster from selfregulation.ca. I put the link there. I will have that in the resources for you when we meet live. But it's just a reminder that when we're problem solving with students, we want to be considering how we set the tone. And so this is a regulation reminder for me that if I stay calm, cool, collected, I'm going to be able to support and initiate conversation and joining up with that student to align our beliefs and fix the problems that present in the classroom. Because life is all about lessons, and we'll learn lots of them together in the classroom with our students. So on that note, thank you for listening to me for the last hour or so. I'll see you live on Wednesday around 5 p.m. And if you have any questions about, you know, really a 20-year overview given in 60 minutes or less. Hopefully I can do justice to some of the questions you have and unpack some of these bigger picture things that are behind all of this work. And at the very least, hopefully I've oriented you towards a positive management philosophy and some strategies that you can use to, number one, build and support that relationship with you, and take that to your relationship with your future students. Take care. It's been great spending the time with you, and we'll see you soon live. Have a good day.